In this video I'm going to cover the material we would have looked at in the hall for our first revision session on the sign of the 4. I'll do exactly what I would have done on the board on the stage, so you can pause the video, make the notes and do the tasks when I ask you to, so exactly the same as we would have done in the hall but virtually. The first thing I'd like you to do is write down these questions. These are questions that are similar to ones that you might get in the exam, and what you'll notice is all of them really are a variation on the same theme. So they're all about Holmes in some sense. The idea is that once you are able to write about Holmes with confidence in general terms, then you will be able to tweak that response to suit any question that comes up. So we begin with the standard how is Holmes presented in this extract. Later on we'll have a look at the potential extracts that you could get in the exam to look at, but that will be the first type of question, so very general. Secondly, how does Conan Doyle present the theme of detection and deduction in this extract? So remember the difference between detection and deduction. Detection is the looking for clues, the observing. The deduction is then the working out the meaning behind those clues. Thirdly, how does Conan Doyle show Holmes to be a skilled detective in this extract? Fourth, how does Conan Doyle display the conflicting sides of Holmes's personality in this extract? Finally, how far does Holmes reflect Victorian values in this extract? So the idea is that for all of these questions, you need to write them down on a piece of paper and then just give yourself an indication with a tick, a cross or a dash to show how confident you would be in answering a question like that on any given extract in the exam. If you were given those questions right now, how confident would you be in being able to answer a full essay on that question? So a tick means, yep, I could do that. A cross means, no, definitely not. And a dash means, I could have a go, but I'm not confident. So write the questions down, give yourself an indication of confidence level. I've been using these grids for literature revision for a while and they've proven to be really useful. The idea is that you choose two different categories by which you can measure a character or a theme in a novel. So if we think about Holmes, the first job is for us to think about some words or terms to sum up his personality and then think of a scale along those lines. So what I've done on the vertical axis is I have written at the top stimulation and at the bottom stagnation, because you will know from reading the text that Holmes fluctuates. He goes backwards and forwards between being extremely stimulated, extremely excitable, to being absolutely stagnated, stuck, bored, depressed. So that's the vertical scale that we're going to use. And then across the middle, the horizontal scale, I've chosen to look at a different aspect of his personality, and that is his attitude towards others. So Holmes can be very critical of others, quite dismissive of others. But on the flip side, occasionally he has glimpses of being quite gracious, and the word gracious is key, because Holmes isn't particularly friendly, nor is he emotional, nor is he kind. But he is gracious in the sense that he will allow himself to recognise the humanity in others and the needs of others. Every now and again he will allow for the fact that they aren't as brilliant as he is, or he will allow for the fact that people experience emotions that he doesn't. So that's why I've chosen gracious, because he does show grace sometimes, and that's key for Holmes in that all the time it's on his terms. But these are the axes that I've chosen, so now let's have a look a little bit further as to how we can then perhaps describe in a little bit more detail those four aspects of his personality. So at this point you could listen to my explanation and then pause. You might disagree with some of these words, you might disagree with the labels that I've given them, but let's have a look and see what you think. So in the top right box, this is the box in which Holmes is extremely stimulated, he is extremely active, he is working, he is excited, but he's also critical. So this is where he doesn't have time he won't suffer fools. He doesn't have time for people who aren't as intelligent as him. He's quite impatient. So in the top right box, this is where I've described Holmes as an expert in capital letters. So this is the Holmes that we see who is impatient, he's abrupt with people, he's dismissive, he's aloof, he's quite distracted, but he is excited at the same time. So this is the Holmes that we see occasionally. We'll identify when shortly. On the flip side of that, if you go to the left-hand side at the top, when he's still stimulated, he's still lively, every now and again, Holmes becomes less critical of people. He becomes more gracious, and he's what I call then a teacher. So he is generous with his ideas, he's patient with others, he's encouraging of others, and he's aware of them for a start. Often when he's in his expert mode, he's not even aware of other people, or if he is, he's very abrupt with them, quite rude to them. When he's being his teacher self, he is fully aware that they're there, and he tries to aid them in some way, to keep up with him, if you like. So that's the two sides of Holmes's positive, active personality, his forward-facing, energetic personality. On the bottom half, we've now got the side of Holmes that we see when he is stagnated in some way, when he is stuck or still. So on the right hand side, when he's feeling critical of both himself and others, this is where I've called Holmes a recluse. So a recluse is somebody who shuts themselves away. The clue part comes from the verb to shut, and the re means it's kind of a prefix that can mean to go back, but in this case it's a prefix that means intensely. So you completely shut yourself off. He is a recluse. When Holmes is like this, we see him to be frustrated, he gets quite depressed, he is troubled, and he is isolated. He isolates himself in these cases. On the other side, though, sometimes Holmes can be stagnated, but he's not reclusive anymore. He doesn't take himself off. He is secluded, by which we mean, rather than being completely shut off, he is shut away slightly. He is very separate from other people. He will be with them. This is why he's gracious at this point. He will spend time with them, but he is bored often. He is resigned. He is sometimes amused by them, but he is very much an observer. He is secluded. He's a bit of a lone wolf. So he's not keeping himself away. He is taking part in normal society in this left-hand bottom box, but he's doing it in a gracious way. He's not being social. He's being an amused observer. So these are the four sides of Holmes's personality that I've identified. You might identify different ones, and that's a good thing. So the more that you own these descriptions, the more that you understand your own feelings about him, the better. But what we're going to do now is identify from those four sides of his personality moments in the text where he shows those aspects. So your first task, before we go on to the next slide, is to pause, and in the box where you've got expert in the top left, I want you to identify moments where Holmes is shown to be absolutely at his best in terms of his expert view, his expert practice. When is he most excited? When is he most stimulated? When is he most enjoying himself, excitable? But equally, when is he most dismissive of other people? So the moments that you might have come up with are in the top right corner. The time when Holmes is most stimulated but equally most critical is when he explores Bartholomew Sholto's study after his body is found. And the chapter itself is called Holmes Gives a Demonstration, and that tells you everything you need to know. This moment, chapter 6, this is Holmes absolutely in his element. He is parading around the room, he's finding the clues, he's making his deductions. Where he's critical is where he says to Watson on numerous occasions, He's impatient with him, and he says to him, "Why will you not apply my methods?" Or "Apply my methods, Watson," or however many times have I told you, once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. He's quite abrupt with Watson here. He's not patient with him. And this is Holmes in that moment of being the expert. He feels that other people can't keep up with him, and he doesn't understand why necessarily. So that's the moment. In terms of stimulation, in that chapter, when he's giving his demonstration of his skill, he is described as being hawk-eyed. He's described as having of tracking the clues on all fours, almost like a trained bloodhound. He is described as being excited, sharp, eager. So this is Holmes at his best in terms of doing his job. Other moments when he is still excited, still doing his job, but he's critical of people. Jonathan Small's confession is an interesting one, and this is where he shows some of the Victorian values, to link back to that question earlier, because he's quite critical of Jonathan Small. He listens to his story, but he has quite strong opinions on it. All of the officers do, who are on the boat listening to the story. But Holmes, he demonstrates his the fact that his views are in line with those that we've looked at as being typical of the Victorian period in the way that he responds to Jonathan Small's confession. When he speaks to Mrs. Smith at the boatyard, he's excited because he's doing his job, but he's quite critical. And this is the moment again where he represents Victorian values. He talks to Watson about the fact that with these people, and that's a quote, he says, with these people, he says you've got to pretend you don't want any information from them in order to get it. He's quite critical of the working classes. He's quite dismissive and patronising about Mrs. Smith. So this shows again his impatience with people, his lack of empathy, his lack of care for their situation. What he wants is his clues and his answers. The other moment when he's shown to be fairly critical is when Thaddeus is arrested by Thelny Jones, and it says et al. Because that means everybody else. So the housekeeper, the butler, the gate, the guard at the gate, they're all arrested. He shows impatience there. He's quite sarcastic about it, but he shows his critical side in what takes place there. So this box would help you with the questions that are about Holmes's personality. They would help you answer questions about Holmes when he's shown to be an expert, moments when Holmes is shown to be at his best in terms of doing his job as a detective, but also at his worst potentially when it comes to being human or humane. So the next box we're going to look at is the opposite side. So I want you now to think about, before you press play, before you hit pause, fill in the box in the bottom right. So think about moments where Holmes is the opposite of this. When is Holmes stuck? When is Holmes low? When is he troubled? When is he getting more and more reclusive? When is he taking himself more and more off into his own mind? So you may have thought about the most obvious one, and again this is the title of a chapter. It's called A Break in the Case, and this is the chapter in which Holmes is completely and utterly stuck. He is confounded by the case. He has all the evidence he thinks he needs, he has all the answers he thinks he needs, but he can't find the boat. He has no idea where to go with it. This is the moment in which you will be able to find several quotes at the beginning of this chapter, in particular adjectives to describe him, and this comes from Watson. So there are 4 that I want you to look for, adjectives that Watson uses to describe Holmes, and also have a look for Mrs. Hudson's description of him, and look at the repetition in her description that will help you understand just how much Conan Doyle wanted us to appreciate how different Holmes is at this point, how much he has taken himself off into his own space completely because he's so frustrated and stuck. Another moment where he is stagnated is when he calls in the Baker Street irregulars. Now, this is something he does because he needs support with the case, but he's quite short with Wiggins, the scruffy little lieutenant. He's quite short with him, and that again implies Holmes's impatience. You could argue that it shows his attitudes towards the working classes again, but I think in this case it's an indication of the early stages of his frustration at the break in the case. Another moment where he shows frustration is when they find Bartholomew. Holmes is the only time in the novel, it's the only time he is identified as being shocked. So when they look through the door, Watson describes him as turning back with a certain look on his face. So look that one up in chapter 4. And he says there's something devilish in this Watson. And this is quite key because it's the only time he shows any vague vulnerability to not knowing what's going on. He shows himself to be taken by surprise by something which we don't expect from Holmes. So the next box we're going to look at is the top left. This is looking at moments where Holmes is shown to be back on his track again. He's excited, he's working hard, he's enjoying his work, but he's much more gracious towards others. So what you need to do now is pause the video and think about moments where Holmes is shown to be more of a teacher. When is Holmes shown to be enjoying his work and enjoying working with other people or helping other people? So for this you could have identified first of all the chapter, again the episode of the barrel. In this chapter this is where Holmes sends Watson to get Toby, the dog, and they pursue the trail of the creosote and the wooden-legged man and his accomplice. In this chapter, Holmes is the opposite to what he is in Holmes Gives a Demonstration. Rather than being frustrated with Watson, he's encouraging of Watson, and he tries to help Watson get to the answers. He gives him small clues, he asks him probing questions, and he helps Watson draw his own conclusions. He also, at this stage, tells Watson that Watson himself is somebody who can answer some of these questions based on his own knowledge as a doctor and as somebody who's been around the world to different countries. So Holmes is much more gracious here. Why is that? That's what we need to think about. Why is it that Holmes at this point feels he can be more gracious? He lets people in now. He's willing to look outwards for a little while and help other people come to their own conclusions. Another moment where he shows graciousness in his expertise is when he's looking at Watson's watch. Now this is the only time, again, that we see him acknowledge that other people have feelings. And he almost, in fact I think he does apologise, you'll have to check, it's in chapter 1. But he is on the edge of apologetic because he realises that Watson has emotions associated with his brother's watch. And Holmes has just delivered his thesis on it in quite a critical way. So this shows that, again, he's able to see, if not appreciate them himself, he's able to see that other people do have emotions that he needs to consider. The other moment when he's quite gracious, and you could say this links into Victorian values as well, is when he, again, almost congratulates Mary on her maintenance of the evidence linked to her father's case. He calls her a model client, which from Holmes I think is pretty much the best compliment you could get, a model client. That in itself says a lot about Holmes and what he values in people. It also tells us a little bit about attitudes towards women and the fact that he is not surprised perhaps, but he's grateful for the fact that Mary's done this task of keeping all the evidence safe. Why she wouldn't, I don't know, because it's her father who's gone missing, but in Holmes's mind at least it's an impressive achievement. The other moment where he is gracious, you could argue, is the boat chase. So this, he's excited, he's just pleased to be there, he's enjoying himself. He allows for certain things to pass that he might not have done at previous moments. So, for example, the fact that the police light is still on the boat, he simply says, well, let's have it removed. At another time, I think he would have been more critical of that. When they're chasing the boat, he is encouraging. He is not critical of anybody for the part that they're playing in it. So I think that shows him, again, slightly freer than he normally would be, because he feels he's on the verge of his final solution. So the final box we need to look at is the bottom left, and this is where Holmes is stagnated again, but in a non-critical way. So this is where he is just graciously accepting, or not necessarily accepting, but he's identifying that sometimes life is like this and he finds his own way out of it. So this is where he is secluded somewhat. He is slightly separate from others. So for this box, you could have written in the bottom left corner the idea of him taking his cocaine, his 7% solution. Holmes's use of drugs, morphine or cocaine, is an indication of his acceptance to a degree that this is his life. If he is not in the top right, if he is not stimulated, excited, if his mind is not taken up with looking at, as he calls it, an abstruse cryptogram, he's not satisfied. But he is perfectly satisfied if he has drugs to stimulate him in a different way, to take him off away from himself, so he can seclude himself completely. He also shows graciousness when the case is written up in the newspaper. He's often quoted as saying that he's not interested in praise or credit for these cases, and he isn't. And when he reads the write-up and it talks about Athelney Jones, he's kind of half amused by it. He's not annoyed by it at all. He's not even particularly interested. For him, the job has been done. He's done his job, and that's all that matters. The other moment is when he has dinner with Athelney Jones and Watson. So this is after he's dressed up as the old sailor. He's in very high spirits. And again, having been quite critical of Athelney Jones before, he's quite friendly towards him, and he is happy to cook him dinner. He serves him wine, and apparently he has a great old time talking about all kinds of things. So when Holmes has tackled the problems that are facing him on the right-hand side, it seems he's able to coexist, at least, with other humans in a fairly reasonable way. Always separate from them, but he's able to coexist. So, if we look back at the questions now from the start, you should now feel able to identify questions that you might feel more confident in answering after looking at these moments. Your next task is to find yourselves extracts from these moments. So all of these moments, there are 14 in total in the diagonal lines. Those 14 moments, it would make perfect sense for you to find those extracts in the novel, find those moments, and on the next slide I'll tell you what you need to do with them. So what I want you to do is find the moments mentioned in the grid in the novel. So get the book and find those individual moments. Once you've got them, once you've got the page in front of you, choose 2 quotes from each of those moments. So 2 quotes to sum up what Holmes is like at that point. So for example, we talked about in the top right, Holmes gives a demonstration. You might have the words trained bloodhound, and you might have the phrase hawk-eyed. That then should allow you to write quite a lot about what Holmes is like at that point. Once you've chosen your 2 quotes for each moment, I want you to make a separate grid, so like the one we've just done, but where the moments are, replace those with the quotes. So you'll basically have a page full of quotes, but each quote will relate to Holmes's personality type at that point. So you'll have quotes where Holmes is an expert or critical, quotes when Holmes is an expert but quite gracious, quotes for when Holmes is stagnated and critical, and quotes for when Holmes is stagnated but quite gracious with it. And what that means is, when I ask you to do an extract to whole essay, you don't even need the extract, because I could say to you, this is the idea, I could say to you, the extract we're thinking about is when Holmes has dinner with Athelney Jones. How is Holmes presented then, and why, and how does this compare with how he's presented in the rest of the novel? If you're doing your revision well and thoroughly, there should not be a single moment from that grid, a single quote even, that I could give you that you wouldn't be able to back up with your points and explain back to me. So you should be able to use any one of those moments to write an extract to whole essay. That's the plan. So we'll have a look at this in our next session, but I would like you all to come to the next session with your grid of quotes. Thank you.